Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Kabir Considers. In this video, we're going to react to every cultural region of the USA explained. So I thought that, each state pretty much had its own culture. But then when I think about the South and the group of states that make up the South, I suppose the culture there is going to be quite similar kind of regardless of which state you are in terms of the South. So whether you're in somewhere like, Texas or Alabama, there's going to be a lot of similarities in terms of maybe the accent, the way of life. But then, what other sort of cultural centers are there? Because I suppose maybe East Coast, West Coast, those will be other sort of cultural centers. So yeah, this video is going to be really interesting in terms of breaking it down, like what to expect when you go to certain parts of the USA, how those parts of the USA differ, and stuff like that.
It would be a mischaracterization to say that from coast to coast, America is one contiguous, homogeneous entity, that the people from the lands of California are identical to those of New York, to those of Georgia, to those of Texas. America is a country made of several distinct regions with unique cultures, histories, and geographies.
Okay.
We've spoken before about the various nations of America, that is, the distinct peoples that inhabit the United States, but today's video is going to focus more broadly on geographic cultural regions. Naturally, there will be overlap, but we'll explain all of this shortly. Hello audience, Mr. Z here with another video for you. If you're new to the channel, welcome. We have videos like this every week, so be sure to subscribe and stay tuned. To help distinguish our nation's categorization from our geographic categorization, let's refer back to our previous video on the regions of Russia. We explained how the first three regions of the country were about as thoroughly Russified as one another, while the following regions featured a prominent degree of non-Russian cultures, despite Russians still constituting a majority or plurality. Russian is a nation which we can map out across the country that is Russia, and it is definitively the dominant nation across virtually every region. The United States is more proportionally diverse, and as a result, various regions of the country are home to different American nations.
And I'm guessing this is because, America is made up of so many different, in terms of the settlers that came, there were so many countries that came, so that's why there's a sort of even spread.
Rather than seeing a single American nation dominate all across every region. In this way, the United States is a bit like Europe, where various nations have made their homes in various regions of the continent. As an example, there is a region of Nordic countries that are home to a Scandinavian or Norse-German people, but not everyone in the Nordic region belongs to the Norse-German nation. Finland, for instance, which has a history and culture that stems from a different source, distinguishing the lands of the Scandinavian people or nation from the Nordic region. In this instance, we might consider Finland a sub-region of Scandinavia, with the region as a whole being largely defined by the Norse Germanics. Our first American region is a prime example of this, perhaps the most well-known of America's regions, the South. The core of the American South encompasses the states of North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi, with the states of Virginia, Arkansas, Florida, Louisiana, and Tennessee constituting subregions of the South.
So Texas doesn't make up part of the South of America? No way, I always thought Texas was a southern state.
Naturally, the Southern Nation is the dominant people group in the region, a group of Americans primarily of Brittonic and Baptist background, though African Americans do comprise a large minority in this region. It's worth noting that the Southern Nation extends beyond this range into other areas, but we'll get into that momentarily. Now, this map may suffice for some people, but I and many of you agree that America's state borders are drawn very arbitrarily, and state lines like this simply fail to capture the detail of American geography and population. Fortunately, we've already solved this problem in the past. But don't worry, for those of you who want to see America's regions on a normal state map, we'll also show that toward the end. Under this new map, we can make out the greater detail of the American South as a geographic region. It is a largely coastal region which is cut off from the west by the Appalachian Mountain Range and characterized by a warm, humid climate, extensive wetlands, and broadly rural character. Though this being said, the South is a well-rounded region with a diverse economy that features agricultural, industrial, and recreational elements.
Yeah, there's a lot of oil in the South, I think. Is that right?
It is highly religious, once again largely Baptist, and socially conservative, albeit with a high emphasis on small government and local government politics, as well as a strong sense of exceptionalism, having of course seceded in the late 1800s in an effort to become its own country. The remaining subregions include Miami, which has a far larger Catholic and Hispanic population than the rest of the South and is notably more urbanized. The subregions of Atlanta and the Southern Black Belt are notable outliers for their majority or plurality African American populations. There is a largely French-American or Acadian-American subregion in southwestern Louisiana, as well as the more rural subregion of Arkansas, which, while ethnically and religiously identical to the rest of the South, is far more defined by its position along the bank of the Mississippi River than the rest of the Atlantic and Gulf coastal South. The Ozarks additionally constitute a subregion of the South which is far more rural than the coastal region and almost reminiscent of the inland Appalachians.
Yeah, I remember the Netflix show The Ozarks, and I was just shocked at, because the family, Marty and his family, they were from Chicago, this super, urbanized, modern city, and then they moved to the Ozarks, and it's literally like completely different. You would think almost like different countries. It was just way more rural, and the way that people spoke, so different too.
Having additionally been settled by the same Scotch-Irish population of Appalachia. Speaking of which, aside from helping define the South, this map gives definition to the whole of the United States and allows seemingly small regions to be fleshed down to what they actually are. The region of Appalachia, for instance, is only represented by West Virginia and Kentucky in the original US map, when in reality the region bleeds into several states, reaching as far north as the southern tier of New York and as far south as northern Alabama. The region has a more temperate climate, is relatively underdeveloped, heavily forested and mountainous, with the region's economy centered upon resource extraction, particularly mining, as well as heavy industry,
So
much as we
oil,
described Russia's South Ural
minerals.
region in our previous video. Also similar to the South Urals, the Appalachian region has a strong proclivity toward labor-oriented politics despite its heavily conservative character, sharing the Southern Baptist faith of the South. However, distinguishing it from its coastal southern neighbor, which is broadly Brittonic, Appalachia houses a population which is more distinctly of Scotch-Irish ancestry. Subregions include minor protrusions of the Appalachian culture, geography, and lifestyle over the Ohio River, with the Ohio subregion being more religiously Methodist and ethnically German-American than the rest of Appalachia, while the lands of South Indiana and Illinois, while not as mountainous as Appalachia and more agricultural, share the same Scotch-Irish rural character of the region. Additionally is the subregion of Susquehanna, which is far more German and Lutheran and more thoroughly developed.
I wonder which European countries have the highest sort of, in terms of American people, like which European countries have the highest number of people that settled in America. I would imagine Germany, maybe the UK, maybe Spain. No, I think it's probably Germany and the UK, like England, Scotland, Ireland, Wales.
Another region fleshed out by this map is the Greater Texas region, which is distinguished from the South by its flatter and drier geography and climate, as well as its higher emphasis on resource extraction, particularly oil and natural gas, as well as its more cattle-based agricultural economy. The core of Texas is also dominated by the Southern Baptist American nation, but features a prominent minority of Hispanic Americans as well, most especially along the south and west of the region, as opposed to the large African American minority seen in the coastal South. Much like the coastal South, the Texan region has a pronounced sense of independence and self-sufficiency, owing to the history of the region as an independent state in the early 1800s.
Yeah, the Lone Star State. Is that where the name comes from?
Contributing to a sense of otherness in the Texan region from the rest of the South. This is furthered by the harsher environmental conditions in Texas, which make widespread crop agriculture more difficult than in the coastal South. The Texan region is an intersection of several biomes, including southern-style wetlands to the east, arid desert to the west, and semi-arid prairies, to name a few. Subregions of Greater Texas include the majority Catholic and Hispanic regions along the border with Mexico, as well as the region of New Spain, occupied by a plurality of old-stock Spanish Americans.
New Spain?
The subregion of Arizona
Where's
exists
that?
as the furthest western reach of the Southern Baptist American nation and shares much in common with the most arid parts of Texas, though of course it is removed from the Texan core, lacks the sense of Texan identity felt by core Texans, and it is more broadly Protestant instead of singularly Baptist. The greater Tulsa subregion is an inversion of this, with a more widely diverse ethnic composition but demonstrating significant adherence to Baptist faith and culture. In some ways, the interior west, or just the west, is to the United States what Siberia is to Russia. It is a largely empty expanse which might be regarded as particularly inhospitable territory.
Wow.
Northeastern lands along the
So very sparsely populated. Seems a large chunk of the country to kind of leave, kind of sparse like this. Especially when you've got cities like New York City, Los Angeles that are just so expensive in terms of property and overcrowdedness. Why not build industry, in places like this? It's probably easier said than done, though, isn't it?
The border with Canada are perhaps the most pleasant, with a milder climate and land suitable to extensive crop agriculture, transitioning into denser forest as you push out west. But as you move further into the interior south, you will encounter both the towering Rocky Mountains as well as unforgiving deserts. The region is highly underdeveloped and underpopulated, with a climate that shifts quickly and radically from subarctic mountaintops to hot, dry deserts, but largely its climate can be classified as cold, semi-arid, or rather a steppe climate. Naturally, the region is rooted largely in resource extraction, and in terms of its population, it is largely a mix of Anglo-Americans and German-Americans with a broadly Christian religious background, being less religious and more religiously diverse than previously described regions. Subregions include the Deseret subregion, which is overwhelmingly Mormon, the Colorado subregion, which is overwhelmingly Native American, the Greater Sacramento Valley, which is...
Okay, so Colorado has a high proportion of Native American people in the state. Interesting.
Dominantly Hispanic and Catholic, and the subregion of Lower California, which is extensively urbanized and largely Hispanic, not to mention coastal and far more supportive of the Democratic Party, as opposed to the rest of the interior West, which is more politically mixed, but leans in favor of the Republican and Libertarian parties. A relatively small region of the United States is the Pacific Northwest, a lush oasis of evergreen forests and mountains along the Pacific coast, bordered to the east by the Cascade Mountains and Columbia River, and characterized by its highly progressive coastal cities. The region has a cool coastal climate and could be considered somewhat underdeveloped outside of its major cities. It is predominantly Anglo-American and religiously very secular, though the Jefferson subregion is an exception to this, being broadly Christian and conservative, while the San Francisco subregion is significantly more urbanized and mild in climate compared to the core Northwest. The Pacific Northwest, given its location, is notably influenced by Asian Pacific culture as well as by cross-border Canadian culture neighboring British Columbia, something which has no doubt contributed to the region's particular Anglo-American culture. What we might call the Anglo-American nation, one which exists across the northern United States and which is the dominant nation within Canada.
Yeah, I was quite surprised when we flew from New York City to San Francisco, just the difference in climate and just the energy. It seemed a lot more relaxed, a lot more just calm. Like New York City there was a lot of energy and hustle and bustle, whereas San Francisco seemed a lot more chill.
Moving back eastward, we encounter the plains. As the name suggests, these lands are largely flat, rural, and agricultural, commonly referred to as America's breadbasket or the Corn Belt. This agricultural richness is facilitated by the region's plentiful hydration provided by both the Mississippi and its tributaries, as well as a number of underground aquifers and overland irrigation systems, not to mention the region's hot summer continental climate and fertile soil. The population here is largely of German-American background and religiously is largely Methodist, this distinct group constituting a unique nation in and of itself. Politically, the region is largely supportive of agrarian populist politics and features a largely Scandinavian and Lutheran subregion to its north. It could be considered a relatively underpopulated region, though nowhere near as underpopulated as the interior West, and is certainly more economically productive, contributing some 40 to 60% of all American agriculture.
How many people live in this area in the west of America? Because look, it's such a massive chunk of the country. Like, what's the population of the US? It's like 200 million. Are we talking, 50 million live here?
The Midwestern region is largely
Less.
characterized by its concentration of urban developments along the Great Lakes and its high levels of industry. It is a largely coastal region that extends into prairie lands, making it highly productive not only in the field of manufacturing but in agriculture as well. Its climate is largely continental and ranges from cool to warm based on how far north and how far inland you might be. It is predominantly urban and suburban, ethnically it is largely German-American, and religiously it is largely Catholic. The region was the historic heart of German-American settlement in the mid to late 1800s, receiving a large share of additional immigrants from Poland, Ireland, and other parts of Europe as well. Once the hub of national industrialization, the region has extensive infrastructure based around rail travel, with Chicago serving as the central rail node for the country at large. All of this gives the Midwest a historic political proclivity toward old Republican labor politics, which in contemporary times makes it somewhat politically mixed, though it has leaned strongly toward the Democratic Party in contemporary times given changes in the political priorities of the Democrats and Republicans. The Midwest has two subregions in the form of Southern Illinois, which is more rural and Protestant than the rest of the Midwest, and notably places a greater emphasis on agriculture than the rest of the region. while the greater St. Louis area constitutes another sub-region which, like the rest of the Midwest, is very industrial, German, and Catholic, but is uniquely shaped by the geography of its position on the bank of the Mississippi rather than by the Great Lakes. In the far northeastern corner, we have the region of New England. The region has a cool continental climate and is largely forested in a mix of boreal and deciduous trees, but still fairly well developed and settled. The region is littered with small communities across the interior, with hubs of development being concentrated around rivers, lakes, and of course the Atlantic coast, which gives the region a unique maritime and coastal culture. Predominantly Anglo-American and Irish-American, New England is both religiously mixed and less religious than other regions.
I suppose New England is probably the closest part of America to actual England, because maybe that and New York, because New York is only a 6-7 hour flight from England.
Being among the most secular regions in the country. Like the Pacific Northwest, New England is also significantly influenced by cross-border Anglo-Canadian culture. It has a mixed economy, though one largely focused on resource extraction and recreation, and the politics of the region are fairly trade-oriented but largely mixed, with a lean in favor of the Democratic Party. Finally, we have the Mid-Atlantic, a region characterized by its extensive urbanization and coastal environment. The Mid-Atlantic is home to some of the most recognizable cities in the United States: Boston, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, and of course, New York. The region is thoroughly interconnected by its wide-reaching transportation infrastructure, and it is a major hub of trade, telecommunications, finance, and high tech. The Mid-Atlantic is extremely diverse, though its largest ethnic groups would be Italian and Irish Americans, which in turn contributes to the region being fairly Catholic, though it also has a significant secular population. The greater Washington, D.C. Baltimore area has been classified as a sub-region given that it houses a distinctly large African American majority. And there we have it, the 9 major geocultural regions of the United States.
Let's look at this then. So this is the South, Acadiana, South Texas. So I'm guessing this is also kind of maybe linked with the South. Wow, so this is just straight up desert. No, deseret. This is, yeah, I've never seen it broken down like this. So this is San Francisco right here. Sacramento. Okay, this is Wow. California is quite small. Is this proportionally accurate? Texas is enormous. Absolutely. The West is just gigantic. I mean, so you're telling me this area here is sparsely populated. I mean, it seems like you could put some industry there and just get people to move into the area. Very interesting.
Or at least the contiguous United States. Alaska and Hawaii constitute 2 unique regions of their own defined by their distinct circumstances. Hawaii as an island chain in the Pacific, and Alaska as a far-removed territory sequestered away in the subarctic. Much like our regional breakdown of Russia, this reorganization of the United States shines some light on many of the interstate differences, roles, and relationships that can often be taken for granted and provide greater insight on the full nature of the United States as a country. What do you think of these regions?
Very interesting. I don't know why, but I always assumed that Texas was part of the South. I always thought that Texas was a southern state. Like, do you agree with Mr. X, the person who made this video, that it's not part of the South? Or I don't know, like, because yeah, the Texan accent, I suppose there are Texans who don't have a southern accent, but yeah, I don't know why Texas. I always think of cowboy hats, ranching, which are things that I would associate and most people would associate with Southern USA, no? Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoy my videos, please help me out by liking and subscribing.